What if everyone told you were too broken to be helped, that your past meant you didn't deserve a second chance? This is the story of a girl who was left behind until one lonely rancher refused to give up on her. Their bond would challenge a town's prejudices and teach them both what it really means to heal. Stay with us until the end to witness a transformation that will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support stories that show the true strength of the human spirit. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. The rancher's boots were soaked, and the smell of wet soil clung to the morning air like a warning. He was walking back from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, when he saw her. A small figure curled under the edge of the front porch, soaked to the bone, shaking. She looked like part of the land, brown skin, tangled black hair, barefoot, silent. He stopped a few feet away. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. No response, just wide, cautious eyes staring back at him. Her dress, if it could be called that, was torn and caked in mud. He noticed a deep scratch on her leg, already inflamed. "Jesus," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The girl didn't move, didn't even flinch, just watched him like a wild animal unsure if he was predator or prey. He sighed and rubbed his jaw. "You hungry?" "Still nothing." He left the door open and walked inside, lighting the old stove and warming some beans and tortillas. When he came back out 10 minutes later, she hadn't moved. He set the plate down near her feet and stepped back. Minutes passed. Finally, she crawled forward, hands trembling, and began to eat. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to touch her. That night he laid out an old sleeping bag inside the barn, near the warmth of the horses. She stood silently at the entrance, dripping, watching. "It's warmer here than out there," he said, turning away to give her space. When he came back an hour later with an extra blanket, she was curled up in the corner of the barn, hugging the sleeping bag tightly, already asleep. In town the next day, people asked why his truck had a second plate from the cafe. "Picked up a stray," he said flatly. They raised their eyebrows. "Be careful, Clay. Some of them are trouble. You don't know where she's been." He nodded but didn't answer. He didn't even know her name, but something in her silence reminded him of his own, of that long season after his wife passed, the ache of being invisible, forgotten, left behind. That night the girl stood near the barn door as he fed the horses. She didn't speak, but she stayed, and for him that was enough. The mornings on the ranch always started the same, gray light creeping through the slats of the barn, the soft snorts of the horses, and the metallic clink of feed buckets. But now there was something new, a presence. She moved quietly, barefoot, always watching but never speaking. She swept the floor with a broken broom he didn't even know still existed. She fed the chickens without being told. She folded her blanket and placed it neatly in a corner of the barn. Clay noticed everything, but he said nothing. Words weren't needed yet. At breakfast, he started placing 2 plates on the table. She never came inside. Instead, she waited until he left the porch and took her food out to the edge of the corral, eating with slow, careful bites. On the 3rd day, as he brought her a dry hoodie from an old box of clothes, he asked, "You got a name?" She blinked, then looked down at her hands. No answer, just silence. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Redfield drove up the dirt road in his dusty cruiser. "Heard you got a guest," he said, stepping out. His boots crunched on gravel. "Girl from the edge of the hills. Apache maybe. Word spreading in town." Clay wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "She hasn't caused a problem." "Doesn't mean she won't." The sheriff leaned against his truck, eyes squinting against the sun. "People don't like what they don't understand. That girl, she's got some people nervous." Clay met his gaze. "She's a kid." "She's a stray, might have come from the camp up north. Drugs, trouble, you know how it goes." "No," Clay said simply, "I don't." That night the girl was sitting near the fire pit in the yard, knees hugged to her chest. Clay sat on the porch, nursing a mug of coffee. The wind was cool, brushing over the land like memory. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly, watching the flames flicker, "but you can." She looked at him for a long time, then turned back to the fire. In the stillness, something shifted. It wasn't trust, not yet, but maybe the first step toward it. The first sound she made was a whisper, so faint Clay almost thought it was the wind. He was carrying a bale of hay past the barn when he heard it, a single word. "Lita." He stopped mid-step and turned. She stood in the shadow of the doorway, her small frame barely visible in the morning haze. Her eyes didn't meet his, but she repeated, just a little louder, "Lita." Clay set the bale down slowly. "Is that your name?" he asked. She shook her head, then after a long pause she said, "My grandmother." It was the first time he saw her lips move fully. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in weeks, but her eyes, they carried something heavy. Clay felt it, like an invisible stone pressing down on the air between them. He didn't ask more. Instead, he nodded and said, "That's a good name." That afternoon, he brought out an old wooden box from the attic of the ranch house. Inside were things that once belonged to his wife: hand-knitted shawls, worn-out paperbacks, a photo of her sitting beside a windmill with their dog. He hesitated, then pulled out a thick, soft blanket and brought it to the barn. When he handed it to the girl, she froze. Her fingers hovered over the fabric like it might disappear. Slowly, she took it, held it close, and for the first time looked him directly in the eyes. He didn't speak. She didn't knight him too. Later that evening, he found her near the corral, watching the horses. One of the mares, a skittish roan named Penny, walked over to her. Normally, Penny avoided everyone, but not this time. The girl gently lifted a hand and touched the mare's face. Clay watched from a distance, his heart tight. The next morning, she was there before him, feeding the horses, checking the water troughs. She still didn't talk much, but her silence had changed. It was no longer hiding, it was healing. In town, rumors swirled. She's been through something. He's too old to be taking this on. That girl's broken. Clay heard every word at the feed store, every whisper behind his back. But as he drove home, past the long stretches of desert brush and sunburned fences, he felt none of it mattered. That evening, as he handed her a warm bowl of stew, she looked up at him and said, "Thank you." He didn't reply right away. He just smiled and said, "You're welcome, Lita." It was the first time he used the name, and it felt right. The days began to settle into a quiet rhythm. Lita, though still shy, moved through the ranch with a quiet purpose. She learned how to sweep out the stalls, refill the troughs, and clean the chicken coop without being asked. Clay watched her from the porch sometimes, sipping his coffee, always with a cautious eye, but also with a growing sense of calm. The ranch, once too quiet, now had footsteps again. One morning, as the sun rose golden behind the distant hills, Clay found her near the old fence, brushing Penny, the same mare who had once avoided even his touch. Lita moved gently, humming something too soft to make out. When he approached, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Long, faded scars traced across her back and upper arms, thin lines like old branches against her skin. She must have pulled off her hoodie in the heat, not realizing he was nearby. She froze when she noticed his gaze. Clay didn't ask, he didn't stare, he just said, "Penny looks happy." Lita turned away, nodding once. She didn't speak again that day. But the next morning, she wore the hoodie again, sleeves pulled tight, posture a little more guarded. Clay ached for her but respected the space. He found ways to offer dignity without pity. He taught her how to mend a gate with wire and pliers. She learned to make coffee the way he liked it, too strong and barely sweet. He found a pair of worn boots in a storage trunk and left them by her spot in the barn. The next day they were on her feet. She began to write, too. Nothing big, just short lines in an old composition notebook he gave her when he noticed her watching him balance receipts one evening. She carried it around like a secret, hiding it whenever he came too close. But once, when the wind blew it open on the fence post, he saw a line that made his throat tighten. "Home isn't a place, it's when someone sees you and doesn't look away." In town, the gossip only got louder. Clay overheard a woman at the market whisper, "She's been hurt bad, you can see it in her eyes, that kind of broken doesn't get better." He didn't argue, he just picked up the supplies he needed and drove back home. That night, Lita helped him cook for the first time. He chopped vegetables while she stirred the pot. It wasn't much, just bean stew and cornbread, but it tasted like warmth. When they sat on the porch to eat, the sky above them lit up with soft, distant lightning. She looked at him and asked, "Why do you help me?" He took a long breath, "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago, and because I remember what it's like when no one does." She didn't answer, but that night, for the first time, she slept inside the ranch house on the old couch, wrapped in his wife's quilt. The sun burned brighter as summer settled over the ranch, but the heat did little to cool the rising tension in town. Word had spread about Lita, the Apache girl who stayed with the lonely rancher, and the whispers had turned to murmurs of suspicion and judgment. At the feed store, Clay heard the familiar voices, neighbors and townsfolk debating his choice. "Why is he wasting his time?" one asked. "That girl's got a past no one wants to touch." Another shook her head. "He should have sent her away long ago." One afternoon, a group of men showed up at the ranch, voices rough with distrust. "Clay, you're making trouble," said a local rancher, arms crossed. "People don't take kindly to outsiders, especially ones who have been through who knows what." Clay looked each of them in the eye, his voice steady. "She's not trouble, she's a person." A silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. Then one of the men spat on the ground. "We're trying to protect this town." Clay's jaw tightened. Protect by turning your back on someone who needs help. That's not protection, that's fear. The men grumbled, eyes shifting, but none challenged him further. As they left, Clay felt a mixture of relief and worry. He knew this was just the beginning. That night he found Lita sitting on the porch steps, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "They don't want me here," she whispered. Clay sat beside her. "Some people fear what they don't understand, but I see you." She looked up, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. What if they never do? He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then I'll stand with you, no matter what." The moon rose over the quiet land, casting long shadows that seemed less frightening when faced together. A week later, a black sedan rolled down the dusty ranch road, kicking up clouds of red earth. Out stepped a woman in a sharp suit, Claire, a social worker from the county office. Her eyes scanned the property with a mixture of curiosity and authority. "Good afternoon," Claire said, offering a professional smile. "I'm here to check on Lita's well-being." Clay nodded and invited her inside. He kept his gaze steady, knowing the questions were coming, the doubts that would test his quiet resolve. Claire spoke softly but firmly. "Where is she now?" Clay gestured to the living room. "She's resting." The woman studied the sparse home. "I see. And how long has she been with you?" "About 3 weeks." Claire flipped open a notebook. "Any history of trauma, family, school records?" Clay shook his head. "No paperwork, no history, just a girl who needed shelter." Claire paused, then pulled out a folded letter. "This was left by Lita. She asked me to give it to you." She handed it over carefully. Clay unfolded the paper, reading words penned in careful, tentative handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I am learning what it means to be safe. I want to try to be better. Please believe in me." His eyes stung. "She wrote this." Claire nodded, a small smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "She's stronger than she looks." The conversation turned toward plans for schooling and counseling. Clay stood firm, insisting Lita's healing would happen at her own pace, with respect and patience. As Claire left, she looked back once and said quietly, "You're doing something right." Clay closed the door and looked out over the land, the same land that had taught him to endure, to be patient, and now to hope. The sky darkened with thick clouds as rain began to fall, tapping a slow rhythm on the tin roof of the barn. Inside, Lita sat on a bale of hay, knees drawn to her chest, trembling. For days, the weight of silence and pain had pressed down harder than ever before. Clay noticed her trembling as he approached quietly. "Lita," he called softly. She didn't answer. Instead, tears slipped down her cheeks, unchecked. He sat beside her, pulling his jacket around her shoulders. "You don't have to carry it alone." After a long pause, her voice broke through the quiet. "They said I was broken, too broken to fix, too damaged to care for." Clay swallowed hard. "Who said that?" "Everyone," she whispered, "at the camp, in the town, even in my own head." He reached out, taking her hands in his. "I don't believe that, and I won't let them define you." The walls she'd built began to crumble. Words poured out, memories of nights alone, the fear, the pain. She spoke of loss, abandonment, and the aching loneliness. Clay listened, the lines of grief on his own face deepening. He shared his story too, the loss of his wife, the empty house, the long years of silence. In that moment, two broken souls found unexpected refuge in each other's company. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, but inside the barn, warmth grew. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lita smiled, a fragile, hopeful thing. With the passing weeks, small changes began to ripple through the ranch like fresh spring rain. Lita's laughter, once rare and hesitant, began to bloom like wildflowers in the desert. She planted seeds near the porch, careful and patient, watching as tiny green shoots pushed through the dry soil. Clay found himself smiling more, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The ranch felt alive again, not just with horses and chores, but with hope and companionship. One afternoon they worked side by side, repairing a broken fence along the eastern boundary. Lita's hands were steady now, confident, though she still carried the quiet grace of someone learning to trust. As they hammered nails and tightened wires, she shared stories of her grandmother's garden, of flowers that bloomed even in harsh seasons. Clay listened, captivated by the warmth in her voice. That night they celebrated quietly, marking 1 year since Lita's arrival at the ranch. Clay cooked a simple meal, roasted chicken and fresh vegetables from the small garden she'd nurtured. They ate by candlelight on the porch, the stars stretching vast and bright overhead. "You've changed this place," Clay said softly. And you changed me, Lita replied, her smile radiant. They sat in comfortable silence, knowing that healing was a journey, not a destination. Together, they had taken the first steps toward joy, trust, and a life rebuilt. The news came one bright morning, carried by the school principal in a neatly folded letter. Lita had been offered a scholarship to attend the local high school, a chance at education and a future beyond the ranch. Clay held the letter carefully, reading the words again and again. His heart was torn between pride and fear. Sending her away felt like losing a part of himself. When he told Lita, she looked up at him with steady eyes. I want to learn, not just for me, but for all of us. Clay swallowed hard. I'm scared you'll leave. She reached out, placing her hand over his. I'll come back. This place is my home. He nodded slowly, the weight on his chest easing. Then go and bring back everything you find. The first day of school was a quiet celebration. Lita dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, backpack slung over her shoulder. Clay stood by the gate, watching as she walked into the building, shoulders straight and heart brave. Days turned into weeks. Letters and calls kept their connection alive. On weekends, Lita returned, sharing stories of friends, teachers, and lessons learned. The ranch felt different, emptier, but also filled with promise. Together, they were building bridges between past and future, roots and wings. The sun was beginning to set behind the hills as Lita rode up the dusty driveway, her smile wide and eyes shining. The ranch had never looked more alive, flowers blooming where once there was only dry earth, laughter echoing from the porch, and horses grazing peacefully. Clay leaned against the fence, watching her approach. Welcome home, he said quietly. Lita dismounted, pulling her jacket tighter against the evening breeze. It's good to be back. They walked through the fields together, sharing stories of her time at school, the challenges, the victories, the friendships forged. She spoke with a new confidence, a wisdom earned through struggle and hope. Clay felt something shift deep inside him. The loneliness that had wrapped around his heart like barbed wire was unraveling. She paused near the old oak tree, turning to him. You said you'd break with me if no one else would help. You kept your promise. He smiled, eyes glistening. We broke together and were stronger because of it. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, they sat side by side on the porch steps, the silence between them full of understanding. The ranch was no longer just a place. It was a home reborn, a testament to healing, resilience, and the power of human connection.